Chapter 1. The Invitation to Holly Manor. The snow fell in thick silent flakes outside the window of Hercule Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions. It was mid-December, and London lay muffled under a white blanket. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, in a dark suit with a perfectly knotted tie, sat in his favourite armchair. A small cup of tisane balanced delicately on the arm. In his hand he held a letter, thick cream paper, embossed with a crest of intertwined holly leaves. He turned the envelope over once more, noting the elegant handwriting. The invitation had arrived 2 days earlier, yet he had delayed opening it until this morning. Curiosity, he told himself, must be savoured like fine chocolate. With a small, satisfied sigh, he slit the envelope open. Holly Manor near Little Pembleton, Kent, 10th of December. My dear Monsieur Poirot, it has been far too long since the world has had the pleasure of your company outside the pages of the newspapers. My wife and I would be enormously honoured if you would spend Christmas with us at Holly Manor. We plan a traditional English country Christmas. Log fires, carols, a ball on Christmas Eve, and of course, the crowning of the Holly Queen with our ancient family crown of holly and ivy. There will be a small house party. Family, a few close friends, nothing too taxing, I assure you. Do say yes. It would give me the greatest pleasure to show you our old home, and I confess I should like to hear your views on a little family matter that has been troubling me of late. Nothing serious, you understand, merely a trifle that perhaps your famous little grey cells might illuminate. I await your reply with eagerness. Yours most sincerely, Reginald Harrington Poirot folded the letter neatly and placed it on the small table beside him. Sir Reginald Harrington, he knew the name, a baronet of old stock, made richer still by shrewd investments in shipping before the war. The Harringtons were one of those families who had survived centuries by adapting quietly to changing times. Holly Manor itself was said to be a handsome Elizabethan house, much admired by those who cared for such things. A little family matter. Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. How often had such phrases concealed jealousy, greed, or even murder? Yet the invitation was tempting. Christmas in London was pleasant enough, but it lacked drama. And drama, Poirot admitted to himself, was the spice of life. He reached for his writing paper and penned a brief acceptance. By the afternoon, a telegram confirmed that a car would collect him on the 23rd of December. On the appointed day, a sleek Bentley purred to a stop outside Whitehaven Mansions. The chauffeur, a silent, correct man in dark green livery, loaded Poirot's single valise and held the door open. As they drove out of London, the streets gave way to frost-laced fields and hedgerows heavy with snow. The sky was low and pearl grey, the light soft and diffused. After 2 hours, the car turned between tall stone gateposts topped with weathered lions. A long avenue of ancient oaks led to Holly Manor itself. A beautiful red brick house with tall chimneys and mullioned windows that glowed warmly against the winter dusk. Holly wreaths hung on the great oak door, and lanterns flickered along the drive. The door opened as the car drew up, and Sir Reginald Harrington strode out to greet his guest. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a ruddy countryman's face and a hearty voice. Monsieur Poirot, welcome, welcome. You cannot imagine how delighted we are that you accepted. Poirot descended with his usual precision, brushing an imaginary speck from his overcoat. Sir Reginald, you are too kind. It is I who must thank you for your hospitality. Come in, out of the cold. My wife is longing to meet you. The entrance hall was magnificent. A hammer-beam roof, a vast stone fireplace already blazing, and a sweeping oak staircase adorned with garlands of holly and ivy. The air smelled of pine, wood smoke, and beeswax polish. Lady Evelyn Harrington appeared at the top of the stairs and descended with graceful confidence. She was perhaps 15 years younger than her husband, elegantly slim, with fashionably waved auburn hair and sharp green eyes. Her gown of deep emerald silk shimmered in the firelight. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a cool hand, "we are honoured. I have read so much about your exploits." "Madame, the honour is entirely mine," Poirot replied, bowing over her hand. Other guests were already gathering in the drawing-room for tea. Sir Reginald performed introductions with proud fluency. First, Miss Cecilia Harrington, Sir Reginald's niece and ward, a pretty girl of 20, with golden curls and wide blue eyes. She seemed shy, but her smile was warm. Then Mr. Victor Langton, Sir Reginald's business partner, a lean, dark man of 40, with restless hands and a quick, assessing glance. Mrs. Amelia Forbes, Lady Evelyn's oldest friend, a plump, amiable widow draped in lavender silk and pearls. Captain Richard Trevose, a weathered naval officer recently returned from Malta, broad and bluff with a booming laugh. And finally, Mr. Julian Vale, a young artist of rising reputation whom Lady Evelyn had discovered and invited to paint the family during the Christmas season. He was pale and intense, with untidy black hair and paint-stained fingers. Servants moved quietly among them, offering tea, scones, and tiny mince pies. Conversation flowed easily about the weather, the beauty of the manor, the plans for Christmas. Yet Poirot, sipping his tea, observed. He noted how Victor Langton's eyes followed Cecilia Harrington whenever she moved. How Lady Evelyn's laughter was a fraction too bright when speaking to Julian Vale. How Sir Reginald's hearty bonhomie thinned slightly whenever Langton mentioned the new venture. How Captain Trevose drank rather more whisky than tea, and how his gaze lingered on the silver photograph frames lining the mantelpiece. Family portraits from happier times, and he noticed something else. On a side table, beneath the great stained-glass window, stood a glass case. Inside rested an ancient crown woven of dark green holly leaves and bright red berries, intertwined with strands of gold wire. A small plaque read, "The Harrington Holly Crown, worn by the Holly Queen since 1624. It was beautiful and somehow disquieting. Dinner that evening was a triumph. Turtle soup, roast goose with chestnut stuffing, flaming plum pudding brought into cheers and applause. The long table glittered with crystal and silver beneath the chandeliers. Holly and mistletoe decorated every corner, and a small orchestra played softly from the minstrel's gallery. After the ladies withdrew, the men lingered over port and cigars. Sir Reginald drew Poirot aside. "You will think me foolish, monsieur," he said in a low voice, "but there is something troubling me. Letters, anonymous letters, accusing members of my household of, well, various things. Lies, no doubt, but unpleasant. And then there is the matter of my niece's inheritance. Cecilia comes into a considerable sum next year. I fear someone may try to influence her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You wish me to observe, perhaps?" "Exactly so. Discreetly, of course. I would not have the festivities spoiled." Poirot inclined his head. "It shall be as you wish, mon ami." Later, as he prepared for bed in his comfortable guest-room overlooking the snow-covered gardens, Poirot stood at the window. The moon had risen, silvering the lawns and turning the holly berries on the crown. Visible, even from here in its lighted case below, into drops of blood. He stroked his moustache thoughtfully. A beautiful house, charming people, an ancient tradition, and beneath it all, the faint but unmistakable scent of danger. Poirot smiled a small, satisfied smile. Christmas at Holly Manor, he reflected, would be most interesting indeed. Chapter 2. The Crown of Holly and Secrets. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned bright and bitterly cold. Sunlight glittered on the fresh snow that had fallen overnight, turning the gardens of Holly Manor into a dazzling white expanse. Hercule Poirot, waking early as was his habit, stood at his bedroom window and surveyed the scene with approval. Orderly footprints already crisscrossed the lawn, servants fetching logs, perhaps, or the gardener tending the bird tables. Everything, he thought, appeared perfectly composed. Yet Poirot knew better than most that appearances were the most deceptive of all witnesses. After a meticulous toilette and a cup of excellent chocolate brought by a silent maid, he descended to the breakfast room. Only Cecilia Harrington was there before him, seated at the long table with a plate of untouched toast. She looked pale, her blue eyes shadowed. "Good morning, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, helping himself to coffee and a single croissant from the sideboard. She started slightly. "Oh, good morning, Monsieur Poirot. Did you sleep well?" "Admirably, thank you. And you?" She gave a small, uncertain smile. "Not very. The house creaks so at night. I kept thinking I heard footsteps in the corridor." Poirot's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Footsteps? At what hour?" "After midnight, I think. I looked out, but there was no one." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "It's silly. Old houses always make noises. Aunt Evelyn said I imagine things." Poirot seated himself opposite her. "One should never dismiss what one hears, mademoiselle. The ear is often more truthful than the eye." Before she could reply, the door opened and Julian Vale entered, paint stains still on his cuffs from an early sitting. He greeted them both with absent-minded courtesy and poured himself coffee. Cecilia's cheeks coloured faintly as he sat beside her, and Poirot noted how the young artist's gaze lingered on her face with something more than professional interest. Others drifted in gradually. Captain Trevose, in tweeds smelling of tobacco, Mrs. Forbes chattering about the day's arrangements, Victor Langton reading a letter with a frown that deepened with every line. Sir Reginald and Lady Evelyn appeared last, full of plans for the evening's ball. The chief excitement of the morning was to be the formal presentation of the Harrington Holly crown. After breakfast, the party assembled in the great hall, where the glass case stood. Sir Reginald unlocked it with a small key from his waistcoat pocket, and lifted out the ancient circlet with reverence. It was more beautiful close to than Poirot had realized. Dark, glossy holly leaves preserved somehow over centuries, their edges still sharp, interwoven with bright scarlet berries and delicate threads of gold. A faint scent, herbal, almost medicinal, rose from it. "This," Sir Reginald announced proudly, "has been worn by the Holly Queen of our family every Christmas Eve since 1624. Tradition says it brings prosperity to the house for the coming year. Tonight, Cecilia will wear it at the ball." Cecilia looked startled. "Me? But uncle, surely Aunt Evelyn." Lady Evelyn laughed lightly. "My dear, I wore it often enough in my younger days. It is time the honour passed to you." There was a brief silence. Victor Langton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Julian Vale's dark eyes flashed with some emotion Poirot could not quite read. Captain Trevose cleared his throat and reached for another cigarette. Sir Reginald replaced the crown carefully and locked the case. "It will remain here until this evening," he said. "Then we shall crown our Holly Queen in the ballroom before the dancing begins." The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of preparation. Servants carried armfuls of greenery through the corridors. Musicians arrived to tune instruments in the ballroom. The scent of baking mince pies and spiced beef drifted from the kitchens. Poirot, pleading a desire for fresh air, took a slow walk around the grounds. The snow was deep and crisp, muffling every sound. He paused by the library windows, noting how they looked directly onto a side terrace where footprints led to and from a small door. Interesting. He continued to the orangery, where he found Julian Vale sketching furiously, his breath clouding in the cold glasshouse air. "You work even on Christmas Eve, monsieur?" Poirot inquired. Vale started, then smiled ruefully. "Lady Evelyn wants studies of the family in festive settings. She is very insistent." He glanced towards the house. "And I confess I find inspiration here. There is something dramatic about this place." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "One senses history in every stone, and perhaps secrets also." Vale's pencil stilled. "Secrets?" Poirot shrugged delicately. "Old families always have them, no? Debts, scandals, lost loves, they cling to the walls like ivy." The young man laughed, but it sounded strained. "You have been listening to Captain Trevos's ghost stories." "Perhaps, though I prefer facts to phantoms." Leaving Vale to his sketching, Poirot returned indoors. In the afternoon, the guests gathered in the drawing-room for mulled wine and ghost stories. An old English custom, Sir Reginald explained. The curtains were drawn against the early dark, the fire roared, and shadows danced on panelled walls. Captain Trevose told a tale of a Harrington ancestor who had duelled at midnight over a faithless wife. Mrs. Forbes contributed a gentle story of a grey lady seen in the long gallery. When it came to Julian Vale's turn, he spoke softly of an artist who had painted a portrait containing a hidden message of betrayal, visible only in certain light. Poirot listened attentively, noting how each story seemed to touch a nerve. When Sir Reginald mentioned the legend that misfortune followed any who wore the holly crown unworthily, Lady Evelyn changed the subject with determined brightness. Tea was served, and conversation turned to lighter matters. Yet Poirot's sharp ears caught fragments. Victor Langton, murmuring to Sir Reginald about the accounts not balancing. Lady Evelyn asking Julian whether he had finished Cecilia's portrait yet. Cecilia herself slipping out to the hall to post letters. At 6 o'clock, the guests dispersed to dress for the ball. Poirot, in his room, adjusted his white waistcoat and examined his reflection critically. Satisfied, he descended early, drawn by curiosity to the great hall. The glass case stood open. The holly crown was gone. For a moment he stood motionless, staring at the empty velvet cushion. Then he stepped closer. On the floor beneath the case lay a single bright red holly berry, as though deliberately placed. And on the glass front, faint but unmistakable, were smudges, as though someone had pressed gloved fingers against it in haste. Poirot's eyes gleamed. He stooped, careful not to disturb anything, and examined the lock. No sign of forcing. Whoever had taken the crown had used a key, or had access to one. Footsteps sounded behind him. He straightened to find Sir Reginald approaching, already dressed in evening clothes, his face paling as he saw the empty case. "Good God! The crown! It's gone!" "Precisely, monsieur," Poirot said calmly. "It appears we have a thief in our midst. Or perhaps something more sinister. Sir Reginald looked stricken. But who? The ball begins in an hour. Cecilia is to be crowned. Poirot laid a reassuring hand on his arm. We shall find it, mon ami. Hercule Poirot does not permit ancient traditions to be disrupted by mischief. But we must be discreet. Say nothing yet to the others. As they closed the case and turned away, Poirot's mind raced. A theft on Christmas Eve of a treasured heirloom, hours before it was to be worn. Coincidence? He thought not. Somewhere in this beautiful, snowbound house, someone had a secret urgent enough to risk everything. And Hercule Poirot intended to discover it before the night was out. The orchestra struck up the first waltz in the ballroom, and the chandeliers blazed like stars. Laughter and music floated through Holly Manor. But in the shadows of the great hall, the empty case stood like an omen, and the single fallen berry gleamed dark as blood on the polished floor. Chapter 3. Blood on the Festive Eve. The ballroom of Holly Manor shimmered like a jewel box. Chandeliers blazed with electric light disguised as candle flame, reflecting off polished parquet, and the swirling gowns of the local gentry invited for the Christmas Eve ball. Holly and ivy garlanded every pillar. Mistletoe hung in mischievous bunches above doorways. The orchestra played a lively waltz, and laughter rose above the music like bright bubbles. Hercule Poirot stood a little apart, near the great double doors that opened onto the terrace. He had not danced. His potent leather shoes were too precious for such exertion. But he watched everything with quiet satisfaction. The missing holly crown had not been found, yet Sir Reginald had insisted the ball proceed. Cecilia would be crowned with a substitute circlet of fresh greenery at midnight. The guests seemed to have accepted the story of a temporary misplacement, and the festive mood had returned. Or almost returned. Poirot noted the small tensions. Victor Langton drinking rather steadily at the punch bowl, his eyes fixed on Cecilia as she danced with Julian Vale. Lady Evelyn, radiant in crimson silk, laughing too loudly with Captain Trevose. Sir Reginald circulating among his neighbours, but glancing frequently toward the great hall, as though expecting the crown to reappear by magic. At 11 o'clock, Poirot slipped away. He wished to examine the empty glass case once more in solitude. The corridor outside the ballroom was cooler, scented with pine and distant wood smoke. His footsteps made no sound on the thick Turkey carpet. The great hall was dimly lit, only the fire in the huge hearth still burning low. The glass case stood exactly as they had left it, door closed, lock engaged, velvet cushion bare. Poirot approached slowly, his gaze sweeping the floor. The single hollyberry he had noticed earlier was gone, removed perhaps by a conscientious servant. He frowned, careless. Evidence should never be swept away. He was about to turn when a sound reached him, a soft thud from the library door opposite. The library lay in darkness, its heavy oak door slightly ajar. Poirot's moustache bristled with interest. He moved forward silently, pushed the door wider, and reached for the light switch. The room sprang into harsh electric clarity. Victor Langton lay sprawled on his back beside the library table, evening dress crumpled, one arm flung out. His eyes stared sightlessly at the coffered ceiling. Across his white shirt front spread a dark, spreading stain. On the floor beside his outstretched hand lay the ancient Harrington holly crown, its sharp leaves and bright berries now smeared and spotted with fresh blood. For a moment, Poirot stood motionless, absorbing every detail. Then he stepped forward carefully, avoiding the pooling blood. Langton was quite dead. A single deep wound in the chest, made, Poirot judged at once, by a thin, sharp blade. Death had been almost instantaneous. He knelt briefly, noting the position of the body, the angle of the wound, the absence of any weapon nearby. The crown had been placed deliberately, no, dropped, beside the right hand. Blood had spattered across the gold threads and onto several berries, turning them an even deeper crimson. Poirot straightened and glanced around. The French windows onto the terrace stood slightly open, curtains stirring in the icy draught. Snow had drifted in onto the sill. Footprints! He moved closer. Yes, faint impressions leading in from the terrace, but none leading out. Curious. A clock on the mantelpiece struck the quarter hour. Soon the waltz would end, and guests would spill into the corridors in search of supper. There was no time to lose. Poirot returned swiftly to the ballroom. The music was reaching its crescendo. He caught Sir Reginald's eye across the floor and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the door. Sir Reginald's ruddy face paled, but he excused himself from his partner and joined Poirot in the corridor. "What is it?" he whispered urgently. Poirot took his arm. "Prepare yourself, mon ami. Monsieur Langton has been murdered in the library, stabbed. The holly crown is with him, stained with his blood." Sir Reginald swayed. "Good God! Victor? Dead? But who? That we must discover. Quickly, before panic spreads. The police must be summoned, but the telephone lines may be affected by the snow. And the roads are still blocked. We are isolated." Sir Reginald passed a hand over his face. "What must we do? First, lock the library doors, both the inner and the French windows. Admit no one until I have examined everything more thoroughly. Then announce that Mr. Langton has been taken suddenly ill and has been moved to his room. The ball may continue for a little longer. It will prevent hysteria. But quietly gather the house guests in the drawing-room after supper. I will speak to them there." Sir Reginald nodded numbly and hurried to find the butler. Within minutes the library was secured. Poirot returned alone, closing the door softly behind him. He surveyed the scene again, more carefully now. The wound suggested a stiletto or similar narrow blade, perhaps a paper knife. He searched the desk. An ivory-handled letter opener lay in its usual place, clean. No blood there. Books lay scattered as though a struggle had taken place, yet nothing appeared overturned violently. Langton had come here willingly, perhaps for a meeting. The open French window suggested the murderer had entered or escaped that way. Poirot examined the footprints more closely. They were small, narrow, made by evening shoes, not boots. The tread was smooth, almost new. A gentleman's shoe, or perhaps a lady's dress slipper. Snow had melted, blurring the edges, but the direction was clear. In, but not out. He stepped onto the terrace. The snow was deep and untouched, except for those prints leading to the window. Beyond, the gardens lay white and silent under the moon. No tracks led away toward the stables or gates. Whoever had come this way had either remained in the house or had removed their shoes. Poirot returned inside, thoughtful. He lifted the holly crown with his handkerchief, examining it carefully. The blood was still wet. The murder had occurred very recently, perhaps within the last half hour. A single sharp holly leaf had been snapped off, probably during the struggle. A faint scent clung to the crown. Not just the herbal aroma he remembered, but something sharper. Cologne or perfume? He replaced the crown exactly as he had found it and left the room, locking the door behind him and pocketing the key. In the drawing room after supper, the house party gathered as requested. The local guests had departed. Only the family and invited friends remained. The atmosphere was strained beneath forced smiles. Cecilia sat pale on a sofa, clutching a glass of water. Julian Vale stood behind her chair, one hand protectively on her shoulder. Lady Evelyn smoked cigarette after cigarette. Captain Trevose poured himself a large brandy. Mrs. Forbes dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Sir Reginald closed the door and cleared his throat. "My friends, I am afraid I have grave news. Victor Langton is dead, murdered." A gasp rose. Cecilia gave a small cry. Julian's hand tightened on her shoulder. Poirot stepped forward. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is my unfortunate duty to confirm this. Monsieur Langton was found stabbed in the library not an hour ago. The weapon is missing. The ancient holly crown was beside the body, stained with blood. The police cannot reach us tonight because of the snow. Therefore, until they arrive, I, Hercule Poirot, will take charge of this investigation." He paused, letting his gaze travel over each face. "No one must leave the house. Rooms will be searched if necessary. I will speak to each of you privately. Alibis will be required for the time between 11 o'clock and midnight. I ask for your full cooperation. The murderer is among us." Silence fell, heavy as the snow outside. In the library, Victor Langton lay cold beneath a hastily placed rug, the blood-soaked holly crown beside him like some terrible parody of a victor's laurel. And in the ballroom beyond, the orchestra, unaware, struck up God Rest You Merry, Gentlemen, its cheerful notes drifting mockingly through the stricken house. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Snow. Christmas morning broke grey and windless. The snow had stopped during the night, leaving Holly Manor buried beneath a thick, unbroken blanket. No vehicle could reach the house. Even the telephone lines sagged under the weight of ice. The inhabitants were prisoners in their own festivity, and the body of Victor Langton still lay in the locked library beneath a velvet pall. Hercule Poirot rose early, as was his custom, and after a meticulous toilette, descended to the breakfast room. Only the butler, Graves, was present, laying out covered dishes with mechanical precision. His face was pale, but his hands did not tremble. "Good morning, Graves. You have had little sleep, I think." "Very little, sir. Sir Reginald instructed that no servant leave the house until the police arrive. We have kept watch in pairs." Poirot nodded approval. "Wise, tell me, did anyone attempt to enter the library after I locked it last night?" "No, sir. I myself sat outside the door until 4 o'clock. Simpson relieved me." Poirot helped himself to a single poached egg and thin toast. "Excellent. And the French windows onto the terrace?" "Locked and bolted from the inside on Sir Reginald's orders, sir. The key is with him." Poirot ate in silence, considering. When Graves withdrew, he slipped out through a side door into the gardens. The air was bitterly cold. His breath hung in clouds. The snow lay pristine except for the narrow paths shovelled by the gardeners toward the stables and woodpile. Poirot walked slowly around the house, studying the ground beneath each window. Beneath the library French windows, he found what he expected. The single set of footprints he had noted last night, leading inward but not out. The snow had preserved them perfectly. Small, elegant evening shoes with a narrow heel. A woman's, or possibly a slight man's. They ended at the window itself. Beyond, inside the room, matching prints in melted snow led across the carpet to the body and then vanished. He followed the house wall. No other prints marred the snow until he reached the morning room. where a confused jumble of tracks showed servants had been in and out fetching evergreens. Nothing helpful. Returning indoors, Poirot found the household gathered in the drawing room. The Christmas tree still glittered in the corner, presents unopened beneath it. An obscene mockery now. Sir Reginald stood by the fire, looking 10 years older. Lady Evelyn sat chain-smoking. Cecilia, white-faced, clung to a cup of tea she did not drink. Julian Vale hovered near her, anger and fear alternating in his dark eyes. Captain Trevose nursed a whisky despite the hour. Mrs. Forbes wept quietly into a handkerchief. Poirot entered quietly and addressed them with calm authority. Mesdames et messieurs, I have examined the grounds. The murderer entered the library from the terrace, but left by the inner door. We are dealing with someone who knows the house well. Today, I will speak to each of you privately. Meanwhile, I ask that no one walk alone in the gardens or attempt to leave. The snow preserves footprints. Any new ones will be noticed. He began with Sir Reginald in the study. Tell me about Monsieur Langton's business affairs with you. Sir Reginald sighed heavily. Victor and I were partners in Harrington and Langton shipping. Lately, there have been irregularities, money missing. I confronted him yesterday afternoon. He swore it was a bookkeeping error, promised to bring papers tonight to explain. We arranged to meet in the library at 11:30, after the local guests left. You did not keep the appointment? No. Lady Evelyn felt unwell. I stayed with her. When Victor did not return to the ballroom, I assumed he had retired early. Poirot nodded. And these missing funds, how much? Nearly £20,000. A motive, then. Exposure, ruin. Next, Lady Evelyn. She was composed now, but her green eyes were wary. I disliked Victor, she said frankly. He was forever hinting that Reginald was too old for the business, that new blood was needed. He looked at Cecilia in a way I did not like, calculating as though she were a balance sheet. You were in the ballroom all evening? Until about 11:40. I felt faint, the heat, the shock of the crown disappearing. Reginald took me to the morning room for air. We stayed there until the announcement. Captain Trevose was blunt. Langton was a bounder. Owed me 500 from cards last summer, kept putting me off. I was in the card room with Colonel Maitland and the vicar until midnight. They'll confirm it. Mrs. Forbes could add little beyond tears. Cecilia was trembling when Poirot questioned her gently in the conservatory. I hated Mr. Langton, she whispered. He wanted to marry me for the money I inherit next birthday. Uncle warned him off, but he kept writing letters. Last week he threatened to tell Uncle lies about Julian and me if I didn't agree. Julian Vale, she flushed. We're in love. We wish to marry, but Uncle feared Julian only wanted my fortune too. It isn't true. He loves me. Where were you between 11 and midnight? Dancing, mostly. Then I went to the cloakroom to fetch my fan. I was alone for perhaps 10 minutes. Julian Vale was defiant. Yes, I needed money. Lady Evelyn promised patronage if I painted the family, but I loved Cecilia truly. Langton knew it. He mocked me yesterday, said I'd never have her or the commission. I wanted to strike him, but I didn't kill him. His alibi, dancing with Cecilia until 11:30, then sketching guests in a corner of the ballroom. Several people had spoken to him. Poirot dismissed him thoughtfully. At luncheon, tension crackled. Conversation died whenever anyone entered. Afterward, Poirot requested the servants assemble in the housekeeper's room. Graves and the maids confirmed that all had been busy below stairs, preparing supper trays until midnight. Footmen had served in the ballroom continuously. No one admitted leaving the house. Yet someone had walked through snow in evening shoes. In the afternoon, Poirot returned to the library with Sir Reginald's permission. The body had been moved to an unused bedroom, but the bloodstain darkened the carpet like an accusation. Poirot examined the French windows again. The catch was stiff, required force to open from outside. He tried it. It squealed faintly. Anyone inside would have heard. He studied the scattered books. One lay open, a ledger from Sir Reginald's study. Pages of figures, several underlined in red. Langton had indeed brought papers to the meeting. A small scrap of paper caught his eye, half hidden beneath the desk, a torn corner of heavy cream notepaper, the same as Holly Manor's stationery. On it, in pencil, 11:30 tonight. Come alone, or the truth comes out. Langton had been lured then. As dusk fell, the wind rose, howling around the eaves. Poirot stood at the landing window, watching snow swirl across the lawns. Footprints from the morning were already blurring. He became aware of movement below. A figure in a dark cloak slipped out of a side door. Cecilia. She hurried across the snow toward the summer house, head down against the wind. Moments later, another figure followed, Julian Vale. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He donned his overcoat and galoshes and went out quietly. The summer house was a small Gothic folly, half buried in snow. Through its glazed door, he saw the two young people inside, Cecilia weeping in Julian's arms. "Can't bear it," she was saying. "If they think it was one of us." "It wasn't," Julian said fiercely. "We'll prove it. After last night, I went straight to my room. I never left it." "But your shoes," Cecilia began. Poirot stepped inside. They sprang apart, startled. "Monsieur Poirot!" Cecilia gasped. "Pardon the intrusion," he said mildly, "but secrets shared in snowstorms have a way of melting. Mademoiselle, you were about to mention Monsieur Vale's shoes." Cecilia looked at Julian in anguish. "This morning I went to your room to leave a note. Your evening shoes were wet, snow on the soles and heels. I dried them by the fire before the maid could see." Julian went white. I can explain. After I left you, I stepped onto the terrace for air. I was upset after Langton's taunts. I only walked a few paces and came back in." Poirot regarded him steadily. "Yet the footprints beneath the library window are identical in size and tread to evening pumps, and they lead only one way." Julian's defiance crumbled. "I swear I never entered the library. I never saw Langton after he left the ballroom." Poirot nodded slowly. "We shall see. Return to the house now, both of you. It grows dark." As they hurried back, Poirot lingered, scanning the snow around the summer house. Fresh prints led here and away. But halfway back another set joined them, larger, booted. Someone had followed the lovers. He followed the boot prints. They circled the house, paused beneath the library window, then returned to a servant's entrance. The plot thickened. That evening, the party gathered unwillingly around the Christmas tree. No one suggested opening presents. Instead, accusations flickered like the firelight. Lady Evelyn's voice cut sharply. "Perhaps we should ask who benefited most from Victor's death. The firm is saved from scandal, isn't it, Reginald?" Sir Reginald flushed darkly. Captain Trevose muttered about gambling debts forgiven. Julian and Cecilia sat apart, avoiding eyes. Poirot watched them all, his little grey cells whirring. Outside, the wind moaned louder, erasing the last traces of yesterday's footprints. But new shadows moved in the snow. Shadows of greed, fear, and desperate love. And somewhere in the house, a murderer walked free, believing the snow had covered every track. Poirot smiled grimly to himself. Snow might hide footprints, but it could not hide the truth from Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. The Poisoned Mistletoe. The wind that had howled all night dropped away just before dawn on the second day after Christmas. A strange, muffled stillness settled over Holly Manor, as though the snow itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot, waking in the half-light, felt the familiar thrill of the chase quickening in his veins. The little grey cells were busy. Pieces of the puzzle shifted and almost fell into place. He dressed with particular care, choosing a charcoal suit and a waistcoat of dove grey, then descended to the dining room. Only Graves was present, laying out a simple breakfast of porridge, kippers, and toast. The elaborate festive dishes had vanished. Any change in the weather? Graves? The men say the main road may be passable by noon tomorrow, sir, if the thaw holds. The telephone is still dead. Poirot nodded and ate sparingly. When he had finished, he asked for the household to assemble in the drawing-room at 10 o'clock, and Graves have ready a large pot of mulled wine, exactly as was served on Christmas Eve. We will need it. At 10, they gathered reluctantly around the cold hearth. The Christmas tree had been stripped of its ornaments. Only bare branches remained, like a skeleton in the corner. No one spoke of presents or carols now. Poirot stood before them, hands clasped behind his back. Mesdames et messieurs, we have a murderer among us. Yesterday I learned much. Today I intend to learn more, but first, a small experiment. He gestured to Graves, who entered bearing a silver tray with a steaming bowl of mulled wine and 8 glasses. The rich scent of cloves, cinnamon, and red wine filled the room. On Christmas Eve, this same wine was served at midnight. 1 glass, I believe, was poisoned. The intended victim escaped by chance, but the attempt was real. I wish to observe your reactions. A ripple of unease passed through the group. Lady Evelyn's cigarette trembled in her fingers. Poisoned, Sir Reginald repeated hoarsely, but no one was taken ill. Someone was meant to be, Poirot replied calmly. The glass was set aside untouched when the alarm was raised about Monsieur Langton. The poisoner believed it had been drunk. He began to pour the wine himself, handing a glass to each person in turn. Cecilia took hers with shaking hands. Julian Vale refused his with a curt shake of the head. Captain Trevose downed half in 1 gulp. Mrs. Forbes sipped nervously. Lady Evelyn stared at her glass as though it were a snake. Sir Reginald drank slowly, eyes on Poirot. What is the point of this charade, monsieur? The point, Poirot said, is truth. Someone in this room knows exactly which glass was poisoned on Christmas Eve, and fears a repetition. He watched them closely. Cecilia's gaze flickered toward the mistletoe still hanging above the doorway. A single white berry had fallen to the carpet beneath it. Poirot followed her glance. Ah, yes, the mistletoe. So innocent, so deadly if prepared correctly. The berries contain viscotoxin, a poison that slows the heart, causes collapse, often death. A few crushed berries in mulled wine would be quite sufficient. Captain Trevose set his glass down sharply. Are you suggesting one of us tried to poison another on Christmas Eve, as well as stabbing Langton? I am suggesting, Poirot said, that the 2 crimes are connected. The same hand, perhaps, or hands in concert. He turned suddenly to Lady Evelyn. Madame, you felt faint on Christmas Eve, no? You retired early with your husband. Yet you returned to the ballroom briefly to fetch something. A fan, perhaps. She met his gaze steadily. I fetched nothing. I was unwell. Curious. For the maid tells me your fan was found later in the cloakroom, beside a glass of mulled wine that had been set down and forgotten. Lady Evelyn paled, but said nothing. Poirot continued. The poison was intended for Monsieur Langton, I believe. He was becoming inconvenient. The embezzlement threatened exposure. His pursuit of Mademoiselle Cecilia threatened scandal. Someone wished him removed quietly. Sir Reginald rose angrily. This is intolerable. You accuse my family. I accuse no one yet, Poirot interrupted smoothly. But let us examine alibis more closely. Monsieur Vale, you admit your shoes were wet with snow. You say you stepped onto the terrace for air. Yet the only footprints beneath the library window match evening pumps exactly. Explain, if you please. Julian flushed. I walked further than I admitted. I was distraught. I went as far as the rose garden, then returned by the side door. Leaving no outgoing prints, I brushed them away. I feared being suspected. Cecilia gave a small cry. Julian! Poirot's eyes gleamed. So you admit entering the library? No, I never went near it, I swear. Poirot turned to Captain Trevose. Capitaine, you have debts. Monsieur Langton owed you money. Did you meet him in the library to press for payment? Trevose's face darkened. I was playing cards until midnight. Ask the vicar. I have asked. You left the card room at 11:45. You returned at 12:15, 30 minutes unaccounted for. Trevose slammed his glass down. I went for a cigar on the terrace, alone. I saw no one. Yet someone saw you, perhaps. Silence fell. The mulled wine steamed untouched on the tray. Poirot sighed theatrically. Very well. Since we make little progress, I propose a reconstruction. Tonight, at 11:30, we will repeat certain movements of Christmas Eve. The orchestra has gone, but we will gather in the ballroom. Each will take the place they occupied then. We shall see what revelations come. The day passed in oppressive quiet. Snow began to thaw. Water dripped from eaves. Servants whispered in corridors. Lunch was a silent meal. In the afternoon, Poirot retreated to the library. The bloodstain had been covered by a rug, but the room still felt heavy with violence. He examined the French windows again, then the desk, the torn scrap of notepaper. 11:30 tonight, come alone, or the truth comes out, was in his pocket. The handwriting was disguised, but he suspected. He opened the ledger Langton had brought. Columns of figures, transfers to an account in London. A name recurred, J. Vale, Julian Vale, or coincidence? At 10 o'clock that evening, the household assembled in the ballroom as instructed. Lamps were lit, the chandelier blazed. Though no music played, the room looked much as it had 2 nights earlier. Poirot directed them like a stage manager. Sir Reginald, you stood here by the fireplace with Colonel Maitland. Lady Evelyn, you were near the punch bowl with Mrs. Forbes. Mademoiselle Cecilia, you danced with Monsieur Vale near the doors to the terrace. Capitaine Trevose, you were in the card-room beyond. They took their places awkwardly. Poirot continued. At 11:30, Monsieur Langton left the ballroom saying he needed air. He went to the library to meet someone. Who followed him? No one spoke. Poirot walked to the terrace doors and opened them. Cold air swept in. The murderer came this way, or pretended to. Snow on shoes, but no outgoing prints. How was this achieved? He stepped outside, then back in, demonstrating. One possibility. The murderer wore galoshes over evening shoes, removed them inside and left by the inner door. Galoshes would leave larger prints, such as I found yesterday near the summer house. All eyes turned to Captain Trevose, who wore naval galoshes in the hall. Trevose laughed harshly. I wasn't the only one with galoshes, monsieur. Half the county owns them. True, Poirot conceded. But let us try another possibility. He returned to the punch bowl and lifted the ladle. Or perhaps the murderer never left the ballroom at all. Perhaps Langton was lured to the library, stabbed, and the crown placed beside him to suggest a ritual killing. The open window and single set of prints, an elaborate blind. Lady Evelyn's voice cut across the room. "This is absurd. We're going in circles." "Patience, madame," Poirot said softly. "The circle is closing." He moved to the mistletoe hanging above the doorway. Reaching up, he detached a single berry and held it up. This little berry nearly killed someone. Crushed into wine, it would have caused death within hours. Blamed perhaps on heart failure after the shock of murder. A perfect second crime to confuse the issue. Cecilia suddenly burst into tears. "Stop it! Please stop!" Julian put an arm around her. "Enough, monsieur. You're tormenting her." Poirot regarded them thoughtfully. "Mademoiselle, you feared the poison was meant for you, no? Because of your inheritance, or perhaps for Monsieur Varl, to remove a suitor your guardian disliked." Sir Reginald looked stricken. "Cecilia, did Langton threaten you further?" She nodded miserably. "He said if I didn't persuade you to let him manage my money, he would ruin Julian's career. He had proof Julian forged a cheque once, desperate for paint and canvas." Julian closed his eyes in anguish. Poirot's voice softened. So many motives, greed, fear, love, revenge, all swirling like the snow outside. He paused, then said quietly, "But one person had access to the crown, to mistletoe berries, to the ledger, to the notepaper. One person could move freely through the house without suspicion." All eyes turned to him. "Tomorrow," Poirot said, "when the police arrive, I will name the killer. Tonight, I ask only that no one walks alone. The game is nearly over." He bowed slightly and left the ballroom. Behind him, the mistletoe swayed gently in the draught from the open terrace doors, its white berries gleaming like tiny skulls in the chandelier light. And somewhere in the darkened house, the murderer listened to the dripping thaw and waited for morning, knowing the net was drawing tight. Chapter 6. Revelations by the Yule. Log. The thaw continued through the night, turning the snow to slush and filling the gutters with steady dripping. By late afternoon on the third day after Christmas, the sky had cleared to a hard pale blue, and distant sounds carried faintly across the fields. The scrape of a plough on the main road, the faint clank of a telegraph pole being repaired. Help was coming. The net was tightening. Hercule Poirot felt it in every nerve. The little grey cells had worked without cease, arranging and rearranging the facts until the pattern emerged clear and merciless. Tonight he would force the final pieces into place. At 8 o'clock, he requested that the household assemble once more in the great hall, where the massive Yule log, brought in ceremonially on Christmas Eve, still smouldered in the huge fireplace. The holly garlands had begun to wilt. A few red berries lay scattered on the hearth like drops of dried blood. The glass case that had once held the ancient crown stood empty, a silent witness. The group gathered reluctantly. Sir Reginald looked haggard, his hearty manner quite gone. Lady Evelyn was pale beneath her careful makeup, her green eyes watchful. Cecilia clung to Julian Vale's arm, her face tear-stained. Captain Trevose stood apart, glass in hand, staring into the fire. Mrs. Forbes sat twisting a handkerchief into knots. Poirot waited until Graves had closed the double doors, then began. "Mesdames et messieurs, the police will arrive tomorrow. Before they do, it is my duty to reveal the truth. We have among us a murderer, clever, desperate, and ruthless. The death of Victor Langton was not a crime of sudden passion, but one carefully planned over weeks. He paused, letting the words settle. Let us begin with the holly crown. It disappeared on Christmas Eve shortly before the ball. Why? To create confusion, yes, but also to provide a weapon of misdirection. Blood on the holly crown would suggest a ritual killing, perhaps tied to the old family legend of misfortune. A clever touch. Lady Evelyn stirred. We all know the legend. Indeed, madam, and someone used it. The crown was removed from its case by a person who possessed a key, or who could obtain one without suspicion. Sir Reginald frowned. Only I and Graves have keys. Precisely, Poirot said softly. Yet a third key exists, an old one kept in the butler's pantry for polishing the case, accessible to anyone who knew the house well. He turned to Cecilia. Mademoiselle, you have lived here since childhood. You know every hiding place, every spare key. Cecilia gasped. You cannot think. I hated Victor, yes, but I did not kill him. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, I will come to that. He paced slowly before the fire. Next, the murder itself. Monsieur Langton was lured to the library by a note. 11:30 tonight. Come alone, or the truth comes out. The handwriting disguised, but the paper was Holly Manor stationery, taken from the writing desk in the morning room. Langton went, expecting a confrontation over the embezzlement. Instead he met death, one swift thrust with a narrow blade. The crown was placed beside the body, smeared with blood. The French window was opened, snow allowed to drift in, and a single set of footprints made leading inward. Captain Trevose snorted. We've been over this. But not the reason for the single set, Poirot replied. The murderer entered from the terrace in evening shoes, stabbed Langton, arranged the scene, then left by the inner door. To complete the illusion, they returned later, after the body was discovered, wearing galoshes over the same shoes, walked backward in their own incoming prints to deepen them, then stepped out and brushed away the galosh marks. Clever, but not clever enough. The depth of the prints was slightly uneven, and a fragment of leaf mould from the terrace was found inside the galosh cupboard. Trevose's glass paused halfway to his lips. Poirot continued. Now the poison. Mistletoe berries crushed into a glass of mulled wine intended for Langton. Had he drunk it, his death would have appeared natural. Heart failure brought on by shock. The stabbing would seem the work of an intruder. But the alarm over the body caused the glass to be abandoned. The poisoner removed it later and emptied it. He withdrew a small twist of paper from his pocket and unfolded it to reveal 3 crushed white berries. Found this morning in the lining of a handbag left in the cloakroom. Carelessness, madame. Lady Evelyn stared at the berries as though hypnotized. Sir Reginald turned to his wife. Evelyn? She laughed, a brittle sound. This is ridiculous. Anyone could have put them there. Perhaps, Poirot conceded, but let us examine motives more closely. He produced the ledger taken from the library. Monsieur Langton was embezzling funds, £20,000, but not for himself alone. Payments were made to an account in the name of J. Vale. Our artist friend needed money desperately. Debts from a failed exhibition in London. Lady Evelyn promised patronage, but only if he painted flattering portraits and encouraged a match between Cecilia and Langton, who would then control her inheritance. Julian Vale went deathly pale. That's a lie. Is it? Poirot said gently. Langton's letters to you, monsieur, found in your room this afternoon, show he paid your debts in return for your cooperation. You were to persuade Cecilia that Langton was preferable to a penniless artist. Cecilia turned to Julian in horror. "Julian, is this true?" He could not meet her eyes. Poirot pressed on, but Langton grew greedy. He threatened to expose the arrangement unless Lady Evelyn persuaded Sir Reginald to sell the shipping line, at a price favourable to Langton. Lady Evelyn could not allow that. The embezzlement would come to light, her social position ruined. Langton had to die. Lady Evelyn rose, trembling. "You have no proof." "I have proof," Poirot said quietly. "The stiletto used was a silver paper knife from your personal writing desk, madame. Reported missing yesterday. It will be found wrapped in oilskin at the bottom of the goldfish pond, where you hid it after wiping it clean. The gardener disturbed you there this morning. You pretended to be feeding the fish." She stared at him, mouth working soundlessly. "And the crown," Poirot continued. "You took it yourself with the spare key. You intended to stage a dramatic scene. Blood on the holly crown, to suggest Cecilia or Julian had killed in some ritual frenzy over the inheritance. But Langton's unexpected resistance caused more blood than planned, and the crown became part of the actual murder scene." Sir Reginald sank into a chair, face buried in his hands. Cecilia began to sob quietly. Captain Trevose muttered, "Good God!" Lady Evelyn looked around wildly, seeking escape, but Graves stood solidly before the doors. Poirot's voice softened. "You acted out of fear, madame, fear of poverty, of disgrace. You convinced yourself Langton deserved it, but murder is never justified." She collapsed suddenly, all defiance gone. "He would have ruined us all," she whispered. "Reginald's health, the shame, I couldn't bear it." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the dying Yule log and Cecilia's weeping. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. "I regret, mon ami, that the truth is so painful, but justice demands it." Sir Reginald nodded numbly. "Do what you must, monsieur." Poirot addressed Graves. "Lock Lady Evelyn in her room until the police arrive. She is not to be left alone." Graves inclined his head and gently took Lady Evelyn's arm. She went without resistance, a broken figure in crimson silk. As the doors closed behind them, Poirot looked at the stricken group. "It is finished. The shadows lift." But as he glanced at the Yule log, now crumbling into ash, he felt no triumph, only the familiar melancholy that follows the unmasking of human weakness. Outside, the thaw quickened. Water rushed in the gutters, carrying away the last of the snow. Tomorrow the police would come, and Holly Manor would never be the same. Yet the ancient house had survived worse. It would endure, scarred but standing, long after the echoes of this tragic Christmas had faded into silence. Chapter 7. The Unmasking Under the Stars. The morning of the fourth day after Christmas brought the long-awaited sound of motor engines labouring up the slushy drive. 2 police cars from the county constabulary crunched to a halt before Holly Manor's great oak door. Detectives in heavy overcoats stamped snow from their boots, while uniformed men began a methodical search of the grounds. Hercule Poirot, however, had requested one final gathering before the official machinery took over entirely. He chose the conservatory, a glass-roofed haven of palms and ferns where winter sunlight now poured in, turning the melting snow outside into rivulets that glittered like diamonds. The air smelled of damp earth and hothouse blooms. It was, Poirot thought, a fitting place for truth to flower. The household assembled at 11 o'clock. Lady Evelyn was not present. She had spent the night under lock and key in her dressing room, watched by a stern-faced maid and Graves himself. The others looked as though sleep had become a stranger. Sir Reginald grey and stooping, Cecilia red-eyed and clinging to Julian Vale's hand, despite everything. Captain Trevose grim, Mrs. Forbes fluttering and tearful. Inspector Morrow, a solid, courteous man with a neat moustache, stood discreetly by the door at Poirot's invitation, notebook in hand. Poirot positioned himself beneath a towering Kentia palm, hands clasped behind his back, green eyes bright. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "before the law takes its course, it is the custom of Hercule Poirot to explain. The police are kind enough to permit me this indulgence. I will be brief." He paused, letting the silence deepen. "We have established that Monsieur Victor Langton was killed by a single thrust of a silver stiletto taken from Lady Evelyn Harrington's writing desk. The ancient holly crown was used to mislead, to suggest ritual or madness. A poisoned glass of mulled wine was prepared as insurance. The single set of footprints in the snow was an elaborate blind, created by walking backward in galoshes and brushing away the marks." Sir Reginald stirred. "We know all this, monsieur. Evelyn has confessed." Poirot raised a delicate hand. "She has confessed, yes, to the murder. But confession is not always the whole truth. There are loose threads, n'est-ce pas? And Hercule Poirot detests loose threads." He turned to Julian Vale. "Monsieur Vale, you admitted accepting money from Langton to influence Mademoiselle Cecilia, yet you loved her truly. When Langton threatened exposure, you quarrelled violently on the afternoon of Christmas Eve. Captain Trevose overheard you in the billiard room. Langton laughing, you shouting that you would see him in hell first." Julian flushed but did not deny it. "Later," Poirot continued, "you took the spare key from the butler's pantry and removed the holly crown, not to frame anyone, but to prevent Cecilia from wearing it. You feared the old legend, or perhaps you wished to spoil Langton's plan to see her crowned as a prelude to pressing his suit." Julian nodded slowly. "That's true. I hid it in the summer house. I intended to return it quietly after the ball. But events overtook you. Langton discovered the crown missing and suspected mischief. He wrote the note himself, 11:30 tonight. Come alone, or the truth comes out, intending to confront the thief in the library. He took the ledger to use as ammunition." Poirot's gaze swept the room. Lady Evelyn, watching everything, saw her opportunity. She followed Langton to the library, carrying her stiletto for protection, or so she later claimed. An argument flared. Langton threatened ruin. In panic and fury, she struck once, fatally. Then, seeing the crown on the desk, Langton had retrieved it from the summer house earlier. She smeared it with blood and arranged the scene. Cecilia gave a small, choked sound. Poirot's voice softened. But there was a second hand at work. The mistletoe poison was not Lady Evelyn's idea. The berries were taken from the decorations in the morning room, by someone who knew botany and poisons. All eyes turned instinctively to Captain Trevose, the seasoned traveller who had spent years in tropical ports. Trevose met Poirot's gaze steadily. "You'll find a small book on poisonous plants in my room, if you look. I collected it in Singapore, but I didn't use it here." "No," Poirot agreed, "you did not. Yet someone borrowed it 2 weeks ago and returned it yesterday, after the attempt failed. The bookmark was moved, Capitaine." Trevose's jaw tightened. Poirot produced a small leather-bound volume and opened it at a page marked with a pressed fern. "Viscum album, mistletoe, the dosage carefully noted in pencil." He closed the book gently. "The poison was prepared by Mrs. Amelia Forbes." A collective gasp rose. Mrs. Forbes gave a whimper and clutched her pearls. "Impossible!" Sir Reginald burst out. "Not impossible," Poirot said. "Mrs. Forbes has been Lady Evelyn's confidant for 30 years. She knew everything, the embezzlement, the threats, the fear of disgrace. She acted not for gain, but for loyalty. She crushed the berries into Langton's glass at midnight, believing she was protecting her dearest friend. When the alarm came and the glass was abandoned, she emptied it down a sink below stairs." Mrs. Forbes began to sob. "I couldn't let him destroy Evelyn. He was a monster. I only meant to make him ill, enough to discredit him. I never dreamed of murder." Inspector Morrow stepped forward quietly and placed a hand on her shoulder. Poirot continued. "So we have the full picture. Lady Evelyn struck the fatal blow in a moment of terror. Mrs. Forbes attempted poison from misguided devotion. Monsieur Vale removed the crown from confused love. All 3 lives touched by greed, fear, and loyalty, until they knotted into tragedy." He turned to Sir Reginald. "And you, mon ami, suspected your wife from the first. That is why you invited me, to watch, to protect her if possible." Sir Reginald bowed his head. "I feared something dreadful. The anonymous letters were mine. I hoped to flush out the danger, but I never imagined." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. "The heart is often blind where it loves most." The conservatory fell silent, save for the soft drip of melting snow from the glass roof and Mrs. Forbes's quiet weeping. Inspector Morrow cleared his throat. "With your permission, Monsieur Poirot, we'll take statements now." Poirot bowed. "Of course, Inspector. I have said all that needs saying." As the police led Mrs. Forbes away, and Sir Reginald followed to make arrangements for his wife, Poirot lingered beneath the palm. Cecilia approached hesitantly, Julian beside her. "Monsieur, thank you, for the truth, however painful." Poirot smiled gently. "The truth is always preferable to shadows, mademoiselle. You are young. You will heal. And perhaps Monsieur Vale, chastened, will prove worthy of the love he nearly lost." Julian met his eyes steadily. "I will, sir, on my honour." They left hand in hand, stepping out into the bright, wet world beyond the glass. Poirot remained a moment longer, watching sunlight sparkle on the thawing lawns. The ancient holly crown, cleaned now of its terrible stain, lay in its case once more. Returned by Julian that morning as a gesture of atonement. Outside, the stars of Christmas had long faded, but the conservatory stars, white blossoms of jasmine climbing the panes, opened bravely in the winter light. Poirot stroked his moustache with satisfaction. Another case concluded, order restored. And somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. A belated celebration of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Though Poirot reflected, as he often did, that goodwill was a fragile thing, easily drowned in the darker currents of the human heart. Yet truth, like sunlight on snow, had its own cleansing power. He turned and walked slowly back toward the house, his small footprints the only marks on the wet gravel, precise, deliberate, and leading forward. Chapter 8. Echoes of the Holly Crown. The police left Holly Manor just after luncheon, their black cars churning slush along the avenue of oaks. Lady Evelyn Harrington and Mrs. Amelia Forbes travelled with them. Lady Evelyn silent and composed in a dark fur coat, Mrs. Forbes weeping quietly into a handkerchief. Sir Reginald stood on the steps until the cars vanished around the bend, then turned back inside without a word. The great oak door closed with a heavy finality that seemed to echo through the entire house. Hercule Poirot lingered in the entrance hall, valise in hand. He had intended to depart on the afternoon train, but a light fall of fresh snow had delayed the roads again. One more night, then. He did not mind. There was something fitting in allowing the house a quiet interval to settle after the storm. Graves approached, impassive as ever. "Your room is ready, sir, should you wish to remain. Sir Reginald asks if you will join him for a glass of sherry before dinner." Poirot inclined his head, with pleasure. He found Sir Reginald in the library, the room scrubbed and aired, the bloodstain banished beneath a new Persian rug, the French windows closed against the pale winter light. The ancient holly crown rested once more in its glass case, gleaming darkly as though nothing had ever sullied it. Sir Reginald stood before the hearth, a decanter and 2 glasses on a small table. He looked suddenly old. The ruddy countryman's colour drained away. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, pouring sherry with a steady hand, "I hardly know how to thank you. You have saved what little remains of my family's honour." Poirot accepted the glass. "I have only revealed the truth, mon ami. Honour is not destroyed by truth. It is sometimes wounded, but it heals cleaner." Sir Reginald gave a wry smile. "You are kinder than I deserve. I blinded myself to Evelyn's fears for years. I thought money and position would shield her. Instead they drove her to—" He could not finish. They drank in silence for a moment, watching the fire. "Cecilia?" Poirot asked gently. "She and young Vale walked to the village church this morning. They wish to marry quietly in the spring. I have given my consent and settled a modest sum on them, free of any trustees. Whatever mistakes the boy made, he acted from love, not greed. I can forgive that." Poirot nodded approval. "A wise decision. Youth deserves its chance." Sir Reginald glanced at the holly crown. "I have decided to give it to the county museum. The tradition ends with this generation. Too many shadows cling to it now. A pity," Poirot murmured, "yet perhaps fitting. Some things are best laid to rest." Dinner that evening was a quiet affair. Only Sir Reginald, Cecilia, Julian, and Poirot at the long table. Captain Trevose had departed at dawn, unable to bear the atmosphere any longer. The chandeliers were dimmed, candles flickered in silver holders. Servants moved softly, as though the house itself were in mourning. Conversation was gentle and careful. Plans for the estate, the first signs of spring bulbs pushing through the thawing earth. Julian's forthcoming exhibition in London. Modest but honest work this time. Cecilia's laughter, though subdued, rang true for the first time since Poirot's arrival. After the ladies, there was only Cecilia, withdrew. Sir Reginald raised his glass. "To absent friends," he said simply, "and to better days." Poirot echoed the toast. Later, unable to sleep, Poirot slipped downstairs in his dressing gown and wandered into the great hall. Moonlight poured through the tall windows, silvering the garlands that no one had yet removed. The holly berries gleamed like tiny warning lights. He stood before the glass case a long while, studying the ancient crown. Centuries of Harrington brides and heiresses had worn it, smiling for portraits that lined the staircase. Prosperity, the legend promised. But prosperity bought at what cost? Pride, isolation, the slow poison of entitlement. He thought of Lady Evelyn's desperate act, of Mrs. Forbes's blind loyalty, of Julian's near fall into corruption. Human nature, ever the same, magnificent and frail. A soft footstep made him turn. Cecilia stood in the doorway, wrapped in a pale blue dressing gown, her golden hair loose about her shoulders. "I saw the light," she said. "I couldn't sleep either." Poirot smiled. "The house is full of echoes tonight, mademoiselle." She joined him before the case. "Uncle says it will go to a museum. I'm glad. It's beautiful, but heavy." "Symbols often are," Poirot agreed. "They carry the weight of all who touched them." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Monsieur Poirot, I blamed myself at first. If I hadn't been heiress to so much money, none of this—" He stopped her gently. "No, no. Money does not create evil. It only reveals what already sleeps in the heart. You are blameless." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." She reached out and touched the glass lightly, as though saying goodbye to an old, dangerous friend, then turned away. "Good night, monsieur. Safe journey tomorrow." "Bonsoir, mademoiselle, and joyeux Noël, belated but sincere." She smiled at that, a real smile, and slipped away upstairs. Poirot remained a little longer. Outside, the moon rode high over the thawing gardens. Icicles dripped from the eaves like slow tears. Somewhere a fox barked in the woods beyond the park. He stroked his moustaches thoughtfully. Another case closed. Another glimpse into the tangled maze of motive and passion. Yet always, at the end, a fragile hope. Two young people walking toward a future unshadowed by the past. He turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to his room. In the morning, the car would come, and he would return to London to order, symmetry, and the next inevitable disturbance of the peace. But tonight, in the hush of Holly Manor, he permitted himself a small, satisfied sigh. The holly crown would gather dust in a museum case, admired by strangers. The blood had been washed away, the secrets spoken aloud. And life, stubborn, resilient life, would continue. Poirot closed his door softly. Outside, the last snow of the season melted quietly into the earth, carrying away the final echoes of a Christmas stained with tragedy, yet redeemed in the end by truth.